Good morning. You're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on the dial. This is the BLAINESWORLD show, and we're heard each Wednesday here at 9 a.m., and you can also watch us on WPVM's Facebook page. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on the Asheville theater scene, as well as on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce my first guest, and she is Dr. Nancy Helm-Estabrooks. And feel free to wave to all your fans and friends in Facebook world. So if anybody's looking,
Hello.
There you go, and to your students as well, past and present. Dr. Nancy Helm-Estabrooks is an internationally recognized speech language pathologist and clinical researcher specializing in the assessment and treatment of neurologically based language and cognitive disorders acquired in adulthood. She is a Brower Smith Distinguished Professor Emerita in the Department of Communication Sciences and Speech Pathology at Boston University School of Medicine, research scientist, National Center for Neurogenic Communication Disorders, University of Arizona, and research professor, University of North Carolina. Among her awards are the honors of the American Speech and Hearing Association, the Academy of Neurologic Communication Sciences and Disorders. A whole bunch of other ones, but I'll kind of stop it at this point in time, except to mention she's written over 100 peer-reviewed articles, 7 books, 31 chapters, and 7 standardized tests, including a bunch of them. Wow. Let me ask you this, Dr. Helm-Estabrooks. The first question I always ask is, as a kid, you grew up where?
In many places.
Okay.
But I had sort of a schizophrenic childhood between Boston, in the Boston area, and the small town of Sackville, New Brunswick, Canada.
Okay.
My parents were from Sackville and had come to the States, and I was born here in Massachusetts, and then during my childhood went back and forth.
The reason I ask that is that I wonder, as a kid, did you always know you wanted to be this research type person?
Absolutely not.
What did you want to be?
As I, started to get old enough to think about things, such as careers, I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. And I was always a pretty strong writer, and I was interested in travel. I had a wonderful 5th grade teacher who was a great geography teacher and inspirer. So I thought that would be the ideal job for me. And then I also got into acting in school plays and also, oratorical contests. And so I thought I would be an actor. My mother talked me out of that. I was a theater major undergraduate school for a little while. And then my mother said, Nancy, you can't dance or sing and you'll starve to death. My hero or shero was Julie Harris. I was in love with James Dean.
Okay, sure.
East of Eden. And I thought I could be Julie Harris. Not until much later did I find out she could sing as well, because she always did dramatic roles. But the odd thing is, I got into speech and language pathology sort of on a whimsy, and I ended up many years later being called in to see Julie Harris, who was in a play in Chicago, had a small stroke and had aphasia, and had come back to Boston. She lived on Cape Cod and was at a rehab hospital there, and they called me in to see Julie and give my opinion about her therapy.
Oh,
it went full circle.
That must have been so exciting for you to meet her.
It was.
Did you told her the story too?
It was thrilling. She was very much the lady, so you didn't do personal stuff right away. Yeah. But I worked with her for quite a while, and I finally got to the place that I could say, what was James Dean really like?
Oh, is that a great story? By the way, just food for thought for you. Just I think last week we did a show on a group called Autumn Players. Have you ever heard of them in
Yes,
Asheville? What?
yes.
Yeah, and I'm thinking your chance for a comeback, to act again, it's never too late. Think about that.
Well, when I was on the road giving workshops and so forth, people would ask me, "Do you miss not acting?" And I said, a lot of giving any talk is theater. So yeah,
Right.
you bring that to any
Well,
long talk.
point well taken. Even when you teach, I contend,
Absolutely, yeah.
or I contend, better teachers tend to be people who are interesting performers. You want to
Mhm.
get your students' interest. So, talk to me then specifically about how you then got into this field, which all of a sudden now is in newspapers a lot. But what got you into aphasia?
Um, when I started my career, my first job was at Children's Hospital in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I thought I wanted to work in medical pediatrics. And then my stepfather had a stroke and became aphasic. And that just changed the whole course of my career. So I ended up then working on a stroke program. I was a first speech pathologist at St. Luke's Hospital. And the first program that was formed to bring all these stroke patients together in one unit and try for early mobility and to get them rehabbed very quickly and back home. And that happened subsequent to my stepfather having the stroke and aphasia.
How old were
So,
you?
a lot of people's careers are serendipity, and mine is an example of that.
How old were you when he had his stroke?
How old was I?
Yeah.
In my 20s.
Oh, okay. So it's right as you get into your professional career.
That's right. Yeah,
Talking about serendipity, you were at kind of the right place at the right time. Unfortunately,
right. And then I just changed the course of my career and left pediatrics. Although strangely, I'm now a co-author on a school age test, the test of integrated language and literacy skills. And I'm working with my co-authors are experts in kids language. And because I've developed a lot of tests, and this one sort of came out of some of the adult stuff I've done, I'm one of the co-authors. So I'm back in a way with children again.
now
So
it's
things keep
interesting.
coming around.
We've mentioned the term, but until I guess maybe several months ago, a lot of people had kind of never heard the term. And then Bruce Willis came down and admitted, to his credit, or somebody admitted, that he has aphasia. So if I can ask you maybe kind of a general description of it, then we'll talk about some of the specifics. But what is it?
All right. Aphasia is a language disorder, and it's an acquired language disorder. So it's nothing you're born with. Uh, Strictly speaking, you have to have a fully acquired language and then had some form of brain damage to the language centers, and usually are in your left hemisphere if you're right-handed, and even for a lot of people who are left-handed. And then you have some degree of loss of your ability to either speak or understand what's being said to you, and it may affect your ability, your literacy skills to read and write. So it mostly occurs in, people like um, who have fully matured and in language. So we think of it as an adult problem, although children can have brain damage to the language zones. So again, they've already started and maybe you fully develop your language skills, except for your vocabulary, which keeps growing throughout your life. It's good to know. You don't lose it, you gain it, particularly if you're a reader. So kids really have a lot of their language skills by the time they're 8 or 9 or 10 years old. So they too could have a stroke or traumatic brain injury or a tumor or an infection to the zone of language, and then acquire a language disorder, which we call aphasia. Now, you talk about how most people didn't know that word or what it was. Maybe they never even heard of it.
Right.
There's one study that was done by the National Aphasia Association, I think in 2016, and something like 86% of the population in the States, maybe it went further than the States. An Australian study showed the same thing. 86% of the people never even heard of aphasia. And then of those who had said, yeah, I've heard that word, only like 6 or 7% could define it, know what it was, not give a fancy description, but really had a handle on what it was. So the one good thing about the Willis family saying that Bruce Willis had aphasia is that because he is such a known person, and it was all over the headlines. I got a lot of texts and phone calls and emails from friends telling me this, that had been on the news, even if I hadn't heard it my own self.
Right.
Yeah. And so it brought it to people's attention. And then there were some very good descriptions. You know, I was reading New York Times and Washington Post, even the LA Times. They went to Cleveland Clinic. They went to Mayo Clinic. They got very good definitions of it. If people bothered to read those articles all the way through. However, what is a little disturbing to me, and I've spoken to the American Speech and Hearing Association about this in a little informal interview, is that he was this was not a sudden onset, so it wasn't a sudden stroke or traumatic brain injury or penetrating head wound like Gabby Giffords, who a bullet penetrated her language area. But it was a slow onset with cognitive problems. So he couldn't memorize his lines. He was confused, according to the description. He even said, I know why you're here. Why am I here on set? And that is not a part of aphasia. Aphasia in and of itself is a language disorder, an acquired language disorder. So aphasia by itself is not a cognitive disorder, only insofar as language is, I suppose, I know part of cognition, but it doesn't necessarily affect memory. It doesn't affect thinking. It doesn't affect your intellectual skills. It's a circumscribed problem within the realm of language. Now, it affects your life greatly. So, Blaine, that if you can't come up with a word, how frustrating it is. Well, the main symptom of aphasia is word finding problems or word retrieval problems. So these go on all the time. So if you can picture that almost every time you go to say something of substance, a noun or an important verb or adjective, you can't come up with that, although you know darn well it's in there. You can imagine that happening over and over again all day long. So one of our patients once said, there's no such thing as mild aphasia. So people will say, well, he has severe aphasia and she has moderate aphasia, but he only has mild aphasia. Well, try having it.
Well, let me ask you then, so is this then a gradual thing that happens? In other words, in the case of Willis or somebody else, it's not something that happens overnight?
No, there are a couple of forms of aphasia that are progressive. So they start with a slow onset and you progressively lose your language ability. And people can find out about progressive aphasias by just putting in progressive aphasia into their search engine at NIH, for example, or the National Aphasia Association website, or even the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic will tell you about the progressive aphasias. But predominantly, aphasia is caused mostly by stroke, and strokes are sudden onset. So you have a stroke, you may have a paralyzed side that goes with it, and you suddenly lose your ability to some extent to speak. There are a lot of people with strokes in this country. About a third of people with strokes have aphasia. Now, whether or not it's permanent or more transient is another story. But picture this, over 2 million people in the United States are living with aphasia. As opposed, that's more people that I think than Parkinson's disease or cerebral palsy, because strokes are prevalent. And as you get older, and by the way, with the national problem of obesity, which causes high blood pressure, and diabetes, which affects your vascular system, we are seeing more strokes and younger strokes, because both those obesity is also becoming a problem with younger people.
Do some people not realize they have it? In other words,
oh God, you know you have it, except that if there's a form of aphasia in which you don't have paralysis,
right?
But because it depends on where the stroke is in the brain and whether it affects the motor system, but you can't understand what people are saying, and your own speech, although it's very fluent, may be full of made-up words we call neologisms and jargon words, like a patient of mine, I feel butterful now than I did because I couldn't click or clack. And what can happen in those cases, and that's called Wernicke's aphasia after Karl Wernicke, the German physician who described it first. They may think that people, because they don't understand what people are saying, it may make them paranoid and think they're talking about them. And in the old days, they could go undiagnosed. In fact, there's one case written up that in the early 1900s, that the patient ended up at McLean Hospital in the Boston area for people with mental psychiatric disorders. And one of my colleagues out at VA in California had a patient who was on the psych unit, and they couldn't figure him out. And they called Jim, and voila, he had, lo and behold, Wernicke's aphasia. It wasn't a psychological problem.
Well, even in the case, for example, of Willis, for example, so you read about it and said that he had these symptoms for a while, but he was still acting, he was still performing, and then all of a sudden, I guess somewhere along the line, somebody diagnosed him. What exactly happened?
I mean, from what and who knows, because I'm only reading what they put out. But one thing that happens when you're very famous, you get a lot of aid. You get a lot of help, right? You get a lot of support. He even traveled with a guy, and you have personal assistants coming out of your ears, I guess. So you can slide for a while. And that it seemed that people were not really noticing, or where he was able, and he was smart, he was an intelligent man. He was covering up, and they were helping cover up for him. But it was not just his language, apparently. It was memory problems, cognitive issues as well. So he his is an unusual form, and I don't know whether it's one of these progressive aphasias that people can read about or not. But usually, the more common thing is like Gabby, give her just shot and immediately, paralyzed on one side. Of course, she was in coma first and then woke up unable to speak.
Now
Although she could always understand.
Right. But
Yeah.
she's made, I guess, a remarkable comeback of sorts. She's never where she was, but can you improve when you have this, or can you function with it?
Well, I've spent a lot of my career, which is a long one. I've been working with aphasia for about 55 years. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't believe in aphasia rehabilitation. I was interviewed I was called in on Gabby's case in 2011. And then she came here to see me. And my colleague, Marjorie Nicholas from MGH, Institute of Health Professions. Marjorie was my student and worked for me for a while. And she happened to be on sabbatical. So I brought her down to work intensely with Gabby for a while. And I was interviewed for the Diane Sawyer show because Gabby was going on with Mark Kelly, her husband, who at the time was an astronaut. And so they wanted me to go to New York. I was working with Gabby. I said, I'm not leaving here. I'm working with Gabby. So they brought a crew down. And I just watched that. And you can watch it still on YouTube or whatever. And what I said was that I believe that Gabby, like most people, would always continue to make improvement, and that I thought that they asked me if she'd go back to Congress. I said, I think Gabby Giffords will end up doing whatever she wants in life. And she has ended up, starting the Gifford Foundation, which is for better laws concerning gun use. And they've been very active with that. She goes around the country, gives talks on it. You've probably seen some yourself. And I talked to her last night. She called me, and she was just back from going around the world because Mark is now a senator from Arizona, and they went with a few other senators and went around the world, and Poland and Ukraine and so forth. So my prediction in 11, which is 11 years ago, I was surprised at how right I was. Her life never stopped. Okay. And it continues to be interesting and more interesting, and she's very effective in what she does, even though her language is limited. But again, she's a very smart woman. Her memory is better than mine, and probably yours too.
What's relationship to dementia? Is there a tie-in?
Well, in some forms of progressive aphasia, they progress to a state of dementia. All right, so again, look up National Aphasia Association, NIH website, put in progressive aphasias, there are different types, and you will find that over time, most of them progress to a state of dementia. Another person that I worked with was, I don't know if you remember him, if you're old enough, Blaine, but the singer Bobby V.
Oh, sure. Just died, right?
You remember Bobby V?
Sure.
Yeah. And Bobby turned out to have Alzheimer's disease. And I'm not blabbing about it, because you can watch him on YouTube talking about his journey. But he started out with an aphasia. So I was, again, called to see Bobby, because in his form of Alzheimer's, his language went first before other cognitive skills were affected. So yes, that's a good question. I hope I answered it.
Also, talk too about people who speak more than one language. You know, it's a problem for anybody.
That's it. Yeah, I get asked that because, when you think about it, if you're multilingual, wouldn't one of them stick? Yeah, but if you're truly multilingual, and by the way, Gabby Giffords was bilingual, Spanish and English, and in fact, she spent I think a year in college in Mexico, or maybe it was a master's thesis or something, and worked with on a farm in the Great Beyond in Mexico. So she was fluent in both languages, and she lost both to the same degree. But interestingly, now she's studying Spanish as well as her regular speech therapy with Fabi Hurst, who's her a speech pathologist in Tucson, and helps her with her speeches and so forth.
And you just mentioned, Dr. Helm-Estabrooks, the concept of therapy. How does therapy come into play in this? In other words, something that you go into therapy right away and for the rest of your life, or how does it come into play?
Unfortunately, insurance has a lot to say about it. So I was in the wonderful position of working on an aphasia unit at the Boston VA, and we could have our vets in there for 6 months. And if they were local, and a lot of them were, they could go home for the weekend because we didn't work on the weekend. So they had speech therapy and other therapies if they needed, like physical and OT, for 6 months. I could also recall them. When I helped develop the method-melodic intonation therapy, I remembered a guy that I had seen who never got his speech back, although his comprehension improved. And I thought he'd be great for melodic intonation therapy. We were able to bring him back in, and were able to get him talking to a pretty functional degree after that. It is a travesty how little rehabilitation, aphasia rehabilitation, that third-party payers allow. So if another thing I hear is speech pathologists, my students will, any student who's listening to this will remember me saying this. When they say, this patient is plateaued, I'm discharging him or her, I say, who's plateaued? The patient or the clinician?
Great line.
Does the clinician run out of ideas? Because you have to keep moving with and being creative with your treatment to address the next stage. And some people don't have the skills to do that.
Dr. Helm-Estabrooks, I'm going to just put you on the spot, and we only have about a minute left. If folks want to get more information about what we've been talking about, what's the best bet?
Okay, so again, National Aphasia Association, put that into your search engine. You'll get a lot of information, including what's going on for local groups for you to join if you have aphasia and you're in hopefully an area that provides some. Now, Dr. Lee Odom, who's a professor at Western Carolina University, she has an aphasia group. I think they probably were on hiatus during COVID, but it's starting up again this fall. And all they have to do is email her. She's on the Western Carolina website, Department of Communication Disorders and Sciences. Write to Lee or Dr. Odom, and she'll let you know about the resumption of that program. And it doesn't take place, by the way, at Western. It's somewhere in the Asheville area.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Helm-Estabrooks, for being my guest on this first half hour on the BLAINESWORLD show. And I look forward to perhaps even meeting you sometime in the future. And best regards to your son, Stu, who's a WPVM personality as well. So say hello to him next time you see him from me.
Yeah, Stu Helm, the food fan.
And he's
We're a
quite
very
a guy.
oral family.
Okay, thanks very
Thank
much.
you, Blaine.
Okay, nice meeting you. Be
Yeah,
well.
bye-bye.
Okay, and as our next guest works her way into the studio, let me just mention that you're listening to WPVM, and our mission is to foster community through programming that cultivates dialogue to inform and entertain. The station provides the medium for artists, business community leaders, and nonprofits to share their voice on live radio. Listeners are invited to help support WPVM's efforts by making a tax-deductible contribution. You can do so by going to the website, wpvmfm.org, and looking at the donate option on the upper right-hand side. Our next guest is Meredith Switzer. And I finally have it right, Switzer, with a long I? Okay, great. And Meredith is the Executive Director of All Souls Counseling Center. And Meredith, you can wave to all your fans and friends in Facebook world. So if you're watching...
Hi, everybody.
Meredith, and Meredith has the distinction, I think this is the 34th time or 35th time you've been a guest on my show?
Something like that, yes. I'm a return guest, and happily so.
Okay, and what's great about Meredith, though, is she's always involved in something new, and you'll talk about what you're involved in right now, but I should mention that Meredith has over 20 years of experience in the nonprofit area, and you're another one, Meredith, you started, what, at the age of 8 or 9?
I was still in diapers, yes.
In diapers.
Yes.
And served in leadership capacities, either on staff, board of directors, or advisory council for more than 15 regional nonprofits. Wow. She was a graduate of Leadership at Asheville. I don't know if we were in the same class, but...
We were not, but we met through Leadership Asheville.
Okay, gotcha. I thought it was Leadership North Carolina, and currently serves on as the Women Up Committee for the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce. She was recognized as the Chamber's Outstanding Woman in Nonprofit Leadership in January 2021. We received a COVID Humanitarian Award in October 2021 for leadership at Homeward Bound of Western North Carolina. She holds a BA in Broadcast Communications from UNC Chapel Hill, and a doctorate and MAD in Educational Psychology from Texas A&M University. And the question, Meredith, you always know I ask this, but this was a while ago. I had you last as a guest. So as a little kid, you grew up, what, was in Texas? You were a child in Texas?
Well, you have a great memory. I was born in Texas, but I lived all over. My dad was in the Air Force. So I moved every 2 to 3 years for the first 11 years of my life.
What? Did you enjoy that?
I did. I think it was a great experience for me. It taught me to learn how to make friends quickly and to build relationships. And I think taught me to be more adaptable. And I got to see great parts of the world. I lived in Germany and Thailand and other states, Michigan and Mississippi and Illinois, and landed back in North Carolina in middle school when my dad retired from the Air Force. And both of my parents are from North Carolina. So that is really where my family roots are. And of course, I've been in Asheville for 24 years. So long time.
So when you were a kid growing up all around the world, what got you into the whole nonprofit area?
Gosh, well, I often tell people that I grew up really knowing the value and the importance of giving back to the community. I saw my parents doing that. They were very involved in volunteer work in the church. They were involved in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, oftentimes in leadership roles, very involved in PTO groups. My mom is an educator, a retired educator. And so I just really, it was ingrained in me at a very young age. And I've always, even from a very young age, known that I wanted to be a helper, be in a helping profession, and was really drawn to that. And even though I started in broadcast communications, I very quickly transitioned into educational psychology and working with nonprofits. And I was teaching for a little while at a private school, but very quickly moved into the nonprofit world in my mid to late 20s.
Seeing you, I'm always reminded of one of my favorite quotes from a woman by the name of Shirley Chisholm. Do you remember who she was? She was the first African-American actually to ever run for president. And she has a great quote, and every time I see you, I'm reminded of it. And she said, service is the rent we pay for living on earth. You know, and just, I see you, and, you know, that's what it seems. I've always admired that about you, giving back to the community, you know, that.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
But just, I love the quote, and every time I see you, I think of it. And that's like everything, since I've known you, that's what you do. You give back to the community, you know, and a variety of different ways. And when I heard, and that's why I'm really excited to have you on board today. So all of a sudden, I guess you were with Homeward Bound for a while. Was that it?
I was with Homeward Bound for a little over 2.5 years, and the
Okay.
bulk of that time in COVID.
Okay. Well, that was it. And then before Homeward Bound, who were you with?
I was doing consulting work. I was working
Okay.
with a variety of nonprofits, and
Nonprofit.
I worked with the YMCA. I did some fundraising work with the Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce. I worked with the Asheville Parks and Greenways Foundation. I was also, prior to my consulting work, for 8 years, I spent working with Junior Achievement of Western North
Okay.
Carolina.
And I think that's maybe how I first met you, and we may have done a show on Junior, another good group. But yeah, that's, I'm pretty sure, the first connection. So how'd you wind up at
Right.
All Souls?
Wow. Well, after I transitioned out of my role at Homeward Bound, I wanted to take some time off. I wanted some respite. I had a really wonderful yet intense experience leading Homeward Bound through the pandemic, and really wanted some better balance with my family, balance and specifically time with my family. So I took 5 months off and traveled, went to see my son who's living in Houston and is in college there. I got to see friends and spend time with my younger boys who are teens who are 14 and in middle school, and just really had some good downtime. And during that time, I got a phone call from a friend who is on the board at All Souls Counseling Center, who knew me from my work at Homeward Bound, and said, I know you're taking time off. I know you're probably not wanting to jump into anything too big right now, but we really need an interim executive director. And I thought of you, and we'd love to talk with you if you're interested. And I thought about it for a little while and got back to her and said, I would love to talk to your board. Not interested in anything permanent right now, but you see what happened. This has happened to me before. I get involved in the work and really enjoy it. And so I started with All Souls Counseling Center in January of this year, and just really loved the mission. And it's a nice small team, a really dedicated staff, and a great group of contract therapists that we work with who are really committed to the mission as well. We work with 20 contract therapists and a great board of directors. And anyway, it evolved, and here I am. I became the permanent executive director at the end of March, and I'm very glad to be here.
You remind me of my wife in the sense that she's was a failed foster, for a cat. We had a cat, and she
Right.
was a foster, for 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden she became, the permanent cat mother. So that reminds me a little bit of you. Here you take this job as temporary, and did you think it was just
Right.
going to be temporary when you took it?
I did. I really did, because I was really dedicated to having more balance in my life. And I honestly didn't think that I could take on another executive director position and have the family balance that I needed. But the board was really interested in having me move forward with them. We were able to work out a really great schedule and time off, and they really trust the work that I do. And I and the staff, I really bonded with the staff. And so I felt like this was a fit that would allow me to be able to do meaningful work, but also have the time that I need with my children and my husband.
Because even as they mentioned, I'm laughing about you having. I can't see you having 5 months off of anything, let alone five days. So
No, I hear that a lot.
right.
Yeah.
But I think your story is a good one though, because I think it's important for all folks to what nonprofit, profit, whatever, to be able to reach that balance. And by the way, I see that as a book for you down the road. I don't know if you're thinking about it, but I'd love to see it.
Oh.
How do you achieve the balance? And using your story as an example, I think it's a great story, because I think a lot of people need that.
Well, and especially right now, Blaine, because I think that we, having come through what I hope is the worst of the pandemic. I know we're still experiencing the effects of COVID, but I hope that the worst is behind us. But I also recognize that so many of us have suffered, and it's affected all of us in a myriad of ways, and some of us more extremely than others. I know for me, it meant that I was working longer hours, and I felt an enormous responsibility to care for others, as I should have. I was leading a large nonprofit, but for me, it was a time of great reflection. And I know that's been the case for so many people. We hear about it on the national scale, about people making job transitions and changing careers and making some extraordinary decisions because they've recognized what their priorities are through the COVID pandemic. And so that was the case for me. And I recognize that not everyone has the opportunity to take time off, and I'm certainly sensitive to that. And so when I say that I took 5 months off, I recognize I say that, and many people are not able to do that. But for me, it was a great gift, and really allowed me to kind of refuel and reset and reflect on what was most important for me. And I also make decisions by faith, and I feel like being called to this work was not by accident. I think being called to work in an agency that addresses mental health and behavioral health and challenges that we all face at some point or another in our life was just the right timing. And I love sharing my story because it's relevant, and it also helps me to understand other people as they're making transitions and have been affected by the stressors of the world that we live in.
Does your current position give you the flexibility, not only you, but your other staffers, to now do some work at home, or are you allowed to do that at all?
I certainly can work from home, and I, on occasion, will do that. However, I really enjoy working in connection and collaboration with people in person when I'm able to do that, certainly when it's safe. And I also have staff who have to be in the office. And so I don't want to ask staff to come in and be present every day and have that expectation if I'm not willing to do that and show up myself. So I am very cognizant of that. And again, I also like coming into the office. For me, it's something that I really enjoy. And so I'm usually here during the day. I spend a lot of time over coffee and over lunches with people in the community. But for the most part, when I'm working, I'm not working at home. I'm working here in my office and in my space at 35 Arlington.
And we should mention that that's where you are now, too. So you're not at home now.
It is.
At home. And talk then a little bit then, because I'm not as familiar as I want to be, but All Souls Counseling Center. So I'll ask you, what is All Souls Counseling Center?
So our mission at All Souls Counseling Center is to provide quality, affordable mental health counseling for the underinsured and the uninsured residents of Western North Carolina. And I'm really proud to say that we've been doing it for 22 years. This October will mark 22 years of providing this really important mental health service in our community. We were born out of a response to a huge gap that was left when family services closed in 2000, and a couple other mental health providers either closed their doors as well, or they had drastic cuts to their budget and they were not able to serve nearly as many clients as they had previously. So again, that was in 2000. And so two psychologists got together and really rallied the mental health community and the philanthropic community. And they said, we've got to figure this out. And so, as often is the case, they also partnered with the faith community, All Souls Cathedral, and opened up the counseling services, the center, if you will, at All Souls. They started using the space at the church. And so that's where it really originated 22 years ago. Very quickly, we outgrew that space, and then moved to a converted home that had been in North Asheville, converted it into an office and used that space for a number of years, moved to another space, and now we are at 35 Arlington Street, which is also a converted older historic home in Asheville. And we've been here since 2009. We actually have 9 rooms or private room spaces where individual therapy can take place, as well as group counseling.
Is any therapy done over the phone?
Well, most of our therapy right now, because we're still experiencing COVID, is done virtually on similar to this format,
Okay.
where it would be over a Zoom call. Telephone, we do have a therapist or two who can do or will do therapy by phone, but it's actually it's better. Those services
Sure.
are better provided through a virtual format or in person. We haven't opened up our center, so we do have clients coming into the center for in-person counseling now.
Well, even like we're doing the show now, it's, to me, I love the idea you can at least see the person, especially I would imagine with counseling, as
Right.
opposed to trying not to be able to see the person, so I imagine that that's a big difference. In terms of All Souls, so it was originally through the church, and there still is tie into the church, but what is
We
the
are
tie-in?
so, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I get that question a lot in the
Right.
community. We are not a faith-based organization. We are a separate 501c3, and we have partnerships with some church communities. For example, we provide counseling services to individuals experiencing homelessness at the Church of the Advocate at Trinity Episcopal. We have a partnership with All Souls Cathedral, and that oftentimes they'll refer people to us. We have a number of community partnerships, but we, again, are not a faith-based organization, even though many of the clinicians who work with us have some faith-based practices. Many are drawn to the work because of their faith, but again, we are not a faith-based. We're not tied to any particular denomination.
How does somebody get connected to All Souls? In other words, and I'll ask you two parts to it, maybe. One, in terms as an individual, and or two, can somebody refer somebody to you or get you hooked in?
So yes, the answer to both of those questions is yes. People can call and inquire about services. So we work with, as I mentioned, people who are underinsured and uninsured. So if you have insurance, generally we're not a good fit for you, because there are a lot of services in the community that can be accessed. There may be significant wait times, but still there are other providers. We are really focused on working with those who don't have insurance options or other options in the community. So they can call and talk to our clinical manager, who will do a screening with each person who calls. She is our front line, our front person, and again, first point of contact. We also receive a lot of referrals from community partners like MAHEC, like Our Voice or Helpmate or the YWCA, or even Homeward Bound. And even primary care physicians will oftentimes refer patients or clients to us if they know that they need support and they are limited on resources. So there are a number of ways that we receive referrals, or that people come to us. Oftentimes we will work with individuals who know about us because they have a friend who receives services, or they have a family member who receives services. So oftentimes word of mouth is how we get connected to prospective clients.
What determines if somebody goes for individual counseling versus group counseling? How is that determination made?
Right. So most of the work that we do is individual counseling. Group counseling, which we're getting ready to start back this month. We've not opened that back up since COVID, but we are starting that back up this month. But group counseling is for individuals who have a common concern or issue that they want to address or process. For example, we're getting ready to start a group counseling session for parents who have lost children to suicide, and we're calling it a Survivors of Suicide group. And that's a very unique group with a very unique set of challenges and struggles. And so certainly that particular group we need to make sure that all the individuals in that group share that experience, unfortunately, as difficult as it is. It could be a group that is dedicated to working with individuals who are in recovery from substance use. So again, groups are for a very specific issue that is being targeted and worked on collectively. Individual counseling is where the desire is to work one-on-one with a therapist in a private setting. Again, it can be in person, in a private room here at our center, or it can be virtual and, privately through a Zoom call. Those are really the differences. The model that we use, we really are known for short-term counseling for 3 to 6 months is really the kind of that range that we consider to be best practice in working with our clients. So that 3 to 6 months, generally once a week counseling for the individual. Groups can go on a little bit longer than that. We're still kind of testing that model right now in terms of how long they'll go. I know some groups go 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. There are some groups that are just open-ended and the group continues to meet until they feel like they're ready to disband. And so it really depends on the needs of the group, the participants, and the desires of the counselor or the group facilitator.
You're still relatively new to All Souls, but talk about the success of the counseling. In other words, you have not only a couple months you've been there, but you have records from, 22 years conceivably. How effective is it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked that question because I get that question a lot as well. So I recently had a prospective donor ask me how we determine success. What are our outcomes and what does that look like? And so every client who receives services from us will take what's called a global assessment of functioning, an assessment. And they will take it after 3 visits with a therapist to get a baseline. And then they will also at the end or the conclusion of their therapy take that assessment again to determine growth. And we see considerable growth. And what that looks like is that clients say they feel better, they have a greater sense of purpose, they have a greater sense of hope, an outlook on the future. They feel like they have better coping skills, better tools in order to deal with the issues or the life experiences that they're having. And so that's really how we determine success. There are times that we will work with a client and they will be discharged from therapy and they'll return a couple years later. Because we've been doing this for 22 years, we certainly have the benefit of seeing the impact over time. And certainly sometimes we'll see clients return for services. And so I think anecdotally, as well as that global assessment of functioning that I was talking about, is a great way to determine how people are being impacted by our services.
What's probably exciting for you is, and for the community as well, when people realize they have a problem and they seek help on their own. Because I guess what's very sad is I guess there are a lot of folks out there who could use help, but they don't either seek it or know they need the help. So that I guess that's an important first step if somebody takes the initiative on their own to say they need some help.
It is. It's and what we have found too is by the time people call us, by the time they reach out to us, they've needed support for a while. They've been thinking about it, ruminating on that for a while. And for us, it's really important to be responsive. And I can tell you when I first joined the organization back in January, just 4 months ago, we had a pretty extensive wait list, which is not uncommon if you talk to providers here. We've seen the needs for mental health go up dramatically in our community and across the country, actually. But we had upwards of 70 people on our wait list. And so that was one of the first things that the team and I started working on. We tried to figure out ways we could start really transitioning people from the wait list to assignments with therapists. So we increased our capacity with our therapists. We were able to increase our session rate for therapists. So even though they donate a lot of their time, they are compensated to a degree, but all of them donate a portion of their time and make a lot less than they could in private practice or if they were doing telehealth, if you will. And so we were able to give them an increase in session rate so that we could encourage them to give more of their time to us as therapists. And then we recruited some more therapists. And it was wonderful to be able to see that wait list start going down. And within 4 months, we were able to decrease the wait list by about 85%. So instead of having a 4 to 5 month wait list or a 4 to 5 month wait to receive services and get assigned to a therapist, there's now about a 1 to 2 week wait. And that's really important because, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, once you call a service provider, or once you finally connect to All Souls Counseling Center and you make that call, you've gotten to the point where you really need someone to talk to. You really need someone to work with. And we don't want people waiting 3, 4, 5 months. That's not healthy. And that's just not what we want for the care that we provide. So we're really proud of the fact that we have a much shorter wait list. We have about 10 people on it now. That's a very manageable number. And we continue to look at ways that we can strengthen our services and our provider network.
How does it tie into the criminal justice system? In other words, I'm thinking out loud that I can immediately increase your caseload, by 250% if you were helping, I guess, all the people lost in the criminal justice system. Is that come into play at all?
That's a great question. We have never really had a formal partnership or provided services in partnership with the criminal justice system. What I can tell you is that I have had conversations with community leaders about working with reentry programs for people who have recently been discharged and were previously incarcerated, but are really working on strengthening their skills, specifically their workforce, employment skills, and social skills oftentimes. And so I am having conversations with community partners and community leaders about what, how that could look in terms of a partnership with the services that we provide.
What do you see as your biggest challenge moving forward?
Well, like most nonprofits, I'm always thinking about the fundraising landscape. Certainly, we need more financial resources. We want to expand our programs. We want to strengthen the work that we're doing again and expand that. We want to do more educational work, raising more awareness in the community, really helping to destigmatize mental health and access to mental health. We want to work more closely with marginalized populations, the persons of color, the Latina community, the community populations that have a language barrier. We want to be more accessible to them, and we recognize that it doesn't mean them coming to us at our center. It means us going out to them, meeting them where they are in the community, at community centers, after school programs, meeting them in their churches. We want to get really creative in how we really build that bridge between the work that we do and the needs in those marginalized communities. So that is really what we're focused on right now.
Is some of your counseling done at some of these off-site centers as well?
That's what we're working on. Right now, we're doing the virtual format, as I mentioned earlier, and we're having individuals come to our center. We do have the one model where we actually provide a therapist at Church of the Advocate, which is in partnership with Trinity Episcopal, where we do provide services for those individuals experiencing homelessness. So that is an example of that, but we want to do a lot more of that in the future.
If folks want to get involved with All Souls Counseling Center, talk about two things. One, how do they get more information?
They can go to our website. It's www.allsoulscounseling.org. And they can find all the resources that they need on our website. There is our phone number. There's our physical address. They can call us. They can send us a message via our website. We would love to get them connected. And we are also going to be doing some volunteer or hosting some volunteer opportunities in the near future, which we will also post on our website. So I just encourage people to find us there.
And I could be wrong, but I assume if they go to the website, they can make a donation as well if they wanted to?
We will make it as easy as possible. There is a link on our website, and we would love to have them come to our website and make a donation to support this important work.
And lastly, you mentioned volunteers. So how do volunteers fit into the process?
Well, we have to get creative because obviously there are confidentiality issues with the work that we do, but we are going to be having some educational series coming up. There are ways for volunteers to get engaged that way and help become ambassadors for mental health. We also are going to be doing some beautification projects here at the center where people can come and dig in the dirt and plant flowers and help us beautify our property. So very nice. There are a lot of ways. I'd
like to thank you, Meredith Switzer, for being my guest the second half hour on the BLAINESWORLD show. Also to Nancy Helm-Estabrooks, my guest the first half hour. as well as to Cappy Sassetti, my producer. And I look forward to having you join me next Wednesday here at 9 a.m. on WPVM 103.7 in Asheville, North Carolina. You can also listen online at WPVMFM.org and watch us on WPVM's Facebook page. Meredith, it's always a pleasure. Stay with me just as we wrap up. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, Blaine.